Well, apparently we are live.
Excellent. It's nice to be here.
It certainly is. Thank you for joining us. We are here at the Kennedy School with Jeff Seglin, and we're here to talk about how it is that someone can, emerge from perhaps the most divisive election, certainly in my life, and go home at a Thanksgiving, which is actually oddly close to the election because it's the latest possible election of the being on the 8th, and end up having productive conversations with the people that you love, despite sometimes their viewpoints. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us. I was reading in WBUR a few days ago, they had a report, and a psychiatric nurse practitioner from Concord, her name was Erica Savino-Moffett, said, "For those who voted Republican, they're worried that their family will be angry at them because they voted for Trump. And for those who voted for the Democratic candidate, they're having a hard time thinking about why friends or family may have voted for the Republican candidate. Basically, there's just a lot of fear, and secondarily, so much sadness and lots of questions." I thought that pretty well summed up the problem a lot of people are facing. Can you give us a take on what do you do when you get home? Yeah.
I think one of the things that's the issue now is there's a lot of free-floating anxiety, that people had expectations that one group of people had expectations this would turn out one way, another group had expectations it would turn out another way, and it was just tossed on its head. And then people tend to live with people who tend to think similarly to them, so they're shocked that things turn out as they don't expect. I think the greatest fear is that the anticipation of actually having to sit down and be with people who may think differently from you. But these are the same people who have always thought differently from you. They're the same people you've had Thanksgiving with all along. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things to do is, the first thing to do is just get to wherever you're going on Thanksgiving and do the same hugging and appreciating family that everybody else has done. And just walking in the door is a big first step of overcoming sort of that anticipation.
Sure. Certainly this election in particular has brought out a lot of very, very strong feelings on both sides. A lot of people, certainly on the folks who voted for Hillary Clinton, saw Donald Trump as unelectable in the beginning, but a lot of the things that he said, especially about minority communities and Muslims, immigrants, etc.,
and women.
And women, and well, I'm not sure that I could go through all the groups, but that has a lot of people really worried about what might happen to them, what might happen to their friends, and those who voted for Donald Trump may, to those people, seem like the proximate cause of that deep-seated fear. I mean, how do you repress that, I guess?
Well, yeah, I don't think you repress it at all. I don't think anybody should press down what they're feeling about anything. I think one of the things that Doug Elmendorf, the new dean at the Kennedy School, I'm giving away my own educational background. One of the things he said when he talked to the students, and he's remarkably non-political and non-partisan about stuff, but when he made comments, I believe it was the day after, talked about many of the comments that were made about the minority community or about immigrants or about women were deplorable and not what we stand for at the Kennedy School, and not what people stand for. And the hope is that the president-elect doesn't govern the way he campaigned. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the fear of the unknown, because we don't know right now. So our job as citizens, regardless of what side they're on, is to make sure that none of those things come to pass that were deplorable, the offensive comments that he made. So that's something that we have to sort of see with time. But again, that's not the first thing I jump into when I'm going home to see my family for a meal. I think I'd probably catch up with them on how the dog is, or on can I help with the vegetables, or can I do all the things I need to do as a family member, if you're having people over, the same type of thing. Or when the conversation turns around to politics, then it becomes time just to mostly not just talk, but also to listen, because I think one of the the real keys to doing things is to hear people and let them talk about how they feel, and let them know that you expect to be heard as well. But the comments that are deplorable. It's one of those questions with, I don't know that anybody can answer the question or will answer the question, or you want to ask the question, how could you have voted for somebody if you feel that his views are deplorable? That's not the way maybe to start the conversation. I would start with the vegetables and work your way up to politics.
So you said you shouldn't repress.
No.
Do you mean also, does that you shouldn't avoid?
No, I don't think you should avoid it at all. But the vast majority of people, I'm guessing, in the Kennedy School is an unusual circumstance because of what we study here. And again, the Divinity School might be different as well. The vast majority of people stay away from politics at the dinner table anyway. They don't. There's just topics they avoid all the time, and this should be probably a good Thanksgiving to stick with that tradition. There are other families that are very engaged with events and with public affairs and with government and talking about those things all the time, and I don't think they should avoid the comments. I think they should make an effort to stay focused on the issues that they want to talk about, as opposed to accusing one another of having motives or doing something for some reason that they find deplorable, to not read into someone's actions as opposed to listening to them. That might mean listening to things you find you disagree with, but then the expectation should be that that person listens to the other person as well. Again, I don't know how many families spend all of their Thanksgiving dinner talking about politics, but those who spend a good portion of it, I think, should be willing to talk about that. The thing that I think that people have when they're talking about issues that they're concerned with, fearful of, one of the ways to talk about this, and this was a piece of advice that a former student from Emerson had given to me, was not to just talk in abstract notions of all these things that might happen, but to tell a story, to tell a story of an undocumented worker you may know who works hard, struggles, gives back to the community, and just what they're going through and just how fearful that person may be or their kids may be, or about a woman's access to health care and how challenging that is, and and memories of a time when that wasn't as accessible. Those stories tend to bring real issues to life, and people are more inclined to acknowledge those when people are involved.
It seems like after the election there were a lot of talks. There was a lot of talk about people being in a bubble of,
Right.
of their own opinions, essentially, and there were kind of two outcomes: either you try and get out of that bubble and try and listen to the other side more, or I've heard some people just completely reject that idea and
Right.
say the other side is they're lost completely. Your family, you can't just reject them.
Well, yes. But there is something in between. I think there's a way. I think that, what's the term? Normalize. I don't think anyone should. I don't know that's. I don't know when that became a real word, but to normalize the types of things that were said during the campaign by the president-elect, I don't think should be found acceptable. I think that shouldn't be found acceptable. Nor should you try to talk to people in a way where you suggest that you agree with that type of behavior. But I think talking to people who think differently from you, whether it's about this or anything else, is always good. That's how we learn. That's how we get to know stuff. That doesn't mean you shouldn't fight as hard as possible for all of the issues that you find important, that you fear may be challenged now. But that's true of any dramatic changeover in governing. So I think that it's possible to not be accepting of that, but still talking to.
It seems like families are a good opportunity or a good place where connections can happen between viewpoints, given the fact that you love these people.
Yes.
But that said, there's a lot of baggage with between any family.
Yes, because when you start talking about that, then they talk to you about why you never cleaned your room as a kid.
Right.
But I think there's a difference between having a conversation with someone and an expectation you're going to convert them. And I think if you go into a conversation that you're going to win an argument, you're setting yourself up for misery and failure. I think going in with the idea that you're going to convert somebody when you know just how vigorously they feel about the opposing view, that's a no-win situation. I think trying to have a conversation with someone knowing that the very likely outcome is you're both going to come away believing exactly as you did when you came away, when you went into the conversation. That's a much more healthy way to go into it than to go in thinking, I'm going to change you, and I'm going to make you see because for some reason I know things that you don't know. That's not a great way to go into a family. That's really not a great way to go into the family with that uncle who you know has always been that guy anyway. But to try to have a conversation with him is not a bad idea as long as you don't hope to convert him.
Given the strong emotions involved, both from the family side, but also from the fact that we're so close, really, to this election, is this even the right time to go out and try to listen? I mean, wouldn't that urge be there to try and hit back and convert rather than converse?
Well, I think it depends on the person, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think it depends what your purpose in going home for Thanksgiving is, or having people for Thanksgiving. One of the things that my oldest grandson Evan did at the table once, just out of the blue. We were just eating, and I think he might have been doing this to put off eating something he didn't want to eat. But he said, can we go around the table? He might have been 8 or 9. He's 17 now, and we went around and he said, can everybody say either something they're thankful for or sing a song? And so we just, he was the first grandkid, so we went around the table and everybody said something they were thankful for. I think one of the things that you have to sort of figure out is what's the purpose of being here. And if the primary purpose is to be with family and to be thankful for something, I think that should be the focus for this particular event. It doesn't mean you should forget all the other stuff, but there is kind of a purpose for Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm. No music then?
It depends on your family, but I think singing is good.
No, I mean, there was no singing.
There was
that
singing.
particular.
There
Oh,
was
okay,
singing.
okay.
Yeah, there was singing.
I hope that didn't mean that the people weren't
No,
thankful.
people were thankful as well, but there were some very nice songs as well.
I don't think anybody would be thankful if I started singing, but
we could try.
So I have a question here from Madeline Serbin, who wants to know any advice for a large international family who's not so much knowledgeable about American insights.
Well, there's two questions there, right? So one is, what is Thanksgiving here?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the different families have different traditions. You said her name is Madeline?
Madeline.
Madeline.
Mm-hmm.
If the question is about why are people so polarized, I think that one of the reasons is the bubble you talked about, that we tend to gather, and different communities or different cities are different, but some communities are still very drawn to live with people who look like them and think like them. It's not a particularly positive thing, either whether you're a liberal or conservative, but it's something that the United States happens. It just happens. So there's large pockets where people are drawn to one another, and then they tend to think that because everybody in their area thinks one way, they forget that there's this whole vast body of people who think differently. Mm-hmm. And that's unique. The United States is very big and very diverse, but it doesn't mean we're very integrated with one another. And the other thing is that the celebration of Thanksgiving is at one time to be thankful, but also it has this odd an embarrassment of riches type of day where there's a lot of food and there's a lot of family and there's a lot of discussion. It's also the day that soup kitchens and volunteer efforts find they don't have any problem finding volunteers to help serve meals to the homeless on Thanksgiving Day. They have trouble having people remember that we should give back throughout the rest of the year.
Right.
So there is this American tradition of at least stopping to think about what we should be thankful for on that one day. So there's two unique American things, although other countries have similar holidays.
Sure.
And other countries certainly have similar polarizing sets of politics where the consequences are often more dire.
Naturally.
Even than ours.
So Delia Cabe, and once again, I'm going to butcher people's names.
Delia.
I
apologize
dearly, Delia. Any advice? Oh, I'm sorry. Is it better just to avoid politics altogether? We spoke close to this before. It seems difficult because so much culture touches politics and society, whether it be LGBT, diversity, religion, theater, etc.
Right. Well, I think one of the things that should drive that is this is not most people's first Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. So if you never talk about politics at the Thanksgiving table, this wouldn't be the time that I would start doing it. I mean, I'm not sure I would stick with the tradition. But people do talk about issues that are political that have nothing to do with the presidential election. They have to do with LGBT issues. They have to do with women's health rights. They have to do with they have to do with the status of immigration in the United States. They have to do with all those things. If those discussions happen regularly, you should continue to have those discussions. There's no reason not to.
Sure.
I don't think this is the time to introduce that to the dinner table, if that's something that you usually have a rule, no politics at the dinner table. I'm not sure you want to start changing that now. But I think the same types of discussions can happen now. You're the same people who you were a year ago. You're the same, gay cousin or, Jewish nephew and Catholic aunt and divorced niece. I mean, there's all mix of people at the dinner table. I think that those issues come up, and I think that people have stories to tell and they want to share them. I think that that's if you don't say that when you've been that kind of family who's discussed this before, that can be equally painful, if not more painful, than actually just talking about the things you usually talk about.
I would imagine that many of our viewers are probably pretty interested in politics, and the subject does naturally come up in their regular, when they see their family. Alejandro Alves wants to know, if a family is going to talk about politics anyway, what's a good question or a way to frame the discussion that can, result in a positive outcome?
Well, I think if you're going to talk about politics anyway, most people are very passionate about local issues. So I think in Massachusetts, for example, we had issues about the legalization of marijuana for recreational use, because it was already legal for medical use, I believe. And there was an issue about raising the cap on charter schools, which got a very heated argument on both sides. There were issues about, was it cage-free chickens? Was that another one? I would start with issues on the local level that you might have been passionate about and talk about those, and talk about the issues that touch the family more, state issues, city issues. I think one of the ways to do that is to talk in a way that you can talk personally about it, that people have various ways of thinking about the issue of public charter schools. They have various ways of thinking about the legalization of marijuana, where there isn't necessarily a right answer and a wrong answer. There just are multiple answers, and they can get into heated discussions. But the challenge, but it doesn't get into a you voted for Hillary, I hate your guts. You voted for Trump, I hate your guts. It sort of starts with issues that are very tangible, as opposed to that free-floating, oh my God, what's going to happen type thing. So I would start locally.
You mentioned that you shouldn't go into a conversation trying to change someone's mind. Anne Grace is curious, how do you respond when someone else is trying to change your mind and is doing the same to you?
I would listen to them, and then I would tell them what you believed and how you felt. I wouldn't try to prolong it. I wouldn't respond by saying, you're wrong, you're an idiot. I would instead listen to them and say, well, I came down differently on the issue, and here's why, and try to be articulate about it. Or if you have no opinion on it, get out of the conversation. There's no point engaging if you don't care. I mean, I forget what the turnout rate was, but it was abysmally low. So there are people who just want this all to go away, which I find remarkable. But if you don't have an opinion on the topic, there's no point in engaging in the issue to shift the topic and say, thanks, but I don't care about marijuana one way or another, and just move it on. But to listen to them and not tell them, not sort of counter with telling them they're wrong, but counter with a story in response. And the more personal you can make it, the more likely it is to keep the conversation level, not personal in terms of attacking the person, but the personal stories you can tell.
Well, I imagine the problem for most people is the emotional reaction when here it is somebody you love, here it is an issue that you feel very strongly about, whether it went your way or went against you, and trying to contain that emotion to respect the relationship.
Well, think of it in this way. There have been in the past some national, some state, but mostly national legislators who were against the idea of same-sex marriage until they discovered that a daughter or a son was gay and in a loving relationship, and then suddenly they understood the issue because there was some human being they understood was there. You're dealing in these conversations with people with someone you may viscerally disagree with, but they're still the family member you loved. So you can disagree with them without without feeling like they don't deserve to have an opinion. You've also been with these relatives where you've all wanted to, not literally, but you've all wanted to sort of lock them someplace away so you didn't have to listen to them, but sometimes it would have to do with things like just telling bad jokes or playing loud music. We've all felt those ways very strongly when we've had, anybody who's grown up with siblings has had that feeling. That doesn't mean you don't love them and you can't figure out a way to talk to them. So find things you can talk about. If politics is not an area to talk about something else that you can talk about. Focus on motorcycles or on cooking or on the Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts are generally a sort of a safe topic, although...
Because everyone loves them, right?
Well, I'm not going to go that far, but everybody has an opinion.
I can't handle anybody who doesn't like Brussels sprouts. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah, but I'd much rather be angry at you for that, because that's not sort of a relationship-ending disagreement.
Sure. Well, maybe not in your house. I don't know.
That's right.
So, Kusha Navadar wants to know, any special considerations if you're spending Thanksgiving with your girlfriends or otherwise your significant other's family?
Well, this is me talking, Kusha. So my general feeling is if you're a guest in somebody's house, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have an opinion, you shouldn't express your opinion, but if the house rules are no politics at the dinner table, you go with the house rules. If somebody else engages you in a discussion and you find something they say distasteful or abhorrent, it's okay to respond with saying, well, I happen to have this opinion. It's okay to respond that way, but I would start off by honoring the rules of the house. If the rules of the house are no politics at the dinner table, follow the rules of the house, but not to sit back and let people say things you find truly offensive. Just disagreeing with somebody shouldn't be offensive, but if it takes the tenor of some of the campaigning took, that's okay to respond by saying, I am not comfortable with you calling such and such a group this, and here's why. That's fair game to do that, and being able to explain that without saying you're an awful human being, you're a terrible human being, although that probably will be inferred or implied. Staying focused on what the issue is would be the way to go. But not being the guest who comes in and says, let me tell you what I think about Hillary and let me tell you what I think about Trump, and sort of having that be your sort of entry into the dinner table wouldn't be the way I would go. But.
Sure. So Tom Haggie wants to know, are there words or phrases to avoid if you don't want to start a food fight? You or some transitions to help end conversations?
Well, we've talked about how do you like those Brussels sprouts as a transition. I think calling someone ignorant, obviously, saying someone's wrong, even if you believe they're wrong, using words that are very judgmental instead of staying focused on the issue. I think being able to express what you believe about something is very possible. We all have words. We all know how to use words without saying to the other person, you're an idiot and here's why. We all know how to say, this is how I feel on that topic, and stay focused on the story and stay away from the visceral anger, wanting to sort of convert the person, even though that's likely what you're feeling in your soul. That part I think you need to control as an adult human being or as any kind of civil human being, but you shouldn't shut down what your beliefs on a particular topic is. You shouldn't sort of stay away from those topics. Transitions words can be, look, we just disagree, why don't we talk about, and then shift the topic. If it's clear it's going to escalate into something that nothing positive will come of. Both stated your sides. Sometimes you actually can have often you can have a fascinating and really interesting discussion with someone with whom you disagree. And you know you're not going to agree with the person. You know he or she's not going to agree with you, and it can be fascinating. If it just feels like it's a name-calling type of thing, then shifting to something else, or if it gets really ugly, just walking to some other guest to talk to would be good.
A lot of people are feeling quite a bit of trepidation just before it's even happened.
Right.
You know, they're just worried about what the reaction is going to be. How should folks deal with that? You know, even before they get to the place where the dinner is being had.
I think bringing a nice house gift. No, I think
it always helps.
We all know, or we should know, and if we don't know, we should learn how to be polite.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we go to someone's house to have dinner, and bring the bottle of wine or whatever dish you're bringing, don't go empty-handed. And treat it like you're going to someone's house for Thanksgiving dinner, and go in with that attitude that this is, even though we know, and we all know this is not like any Thanksgiving that we've had in recent memory because of how close it was to the election. This is for an American audience, at least, that we're going to the place we go to every year to be thankful or to be with our family or to spend time with our families so that we don't have to do this again until next year, but this is the day we're going to come together and appreciate one another. Go in with that attitude that this is our annual Thanksgiving dinner, instead of going in with, oh my God, how am I going to talk to that guy who I think may have voted for that guy, but I'm not quite sure. That's just treating it like it's Thanksgiving and seeing and getting there to decide how to respond before coming up with a plan of attack or a plan of escape beforehand. I think if you're going in with a plan of attack, it might be good to call in sick. I think if you're going in with a plan to escape, then you probably do that every year anyway. So I think that treating it like just as a Thanksgiving where you're going to be with people, most of whom you love, and most of whom love you, and most of whom accept you for who you are, and most of whom you accept for who they are, even though you disagree with them on a lot of issues, should be the way to go.
Thanksgiving is it's particularly useful in this regard because of the nature of the
Yeah.
holiday. But obviously, these kinds of conversations are happening between or being sought after or avoided between families on an ongoing basis and beyond the United States.
Right.
For those times when you don't have that, the Thanksgiving spirit, I suppose, to fall back on. What's the approach?
Well, on Thanksgiving, you also often, this is not everybody's tradition, but you also have a touch football game. I would not break the people up into the Trumps versus the Clintons. I just don't think that, I think you want to mix up the teams a little bit because it could get a little
They
ugly.
tend to be injury bowls as it is,
right,
yeah.
Right, it's good. But I think one of the things, so I have my best friend growing up since the 5th grade. We've been friends for 49 years. And he happens to be very conservative. And I'm pretty sure who he voted for, and he's pretty sure who I voted for. I'm not particularly conservative. And we talk all the time. We talked before the election. We talked after the election. We bet on the World Series. He lost. I won. And we do talk about politics sometime, but we also talk about our kids. And we also talk about our work. And we also talk about our families. Politics isn't all we have to talk about. We don't agree on other things like the World Series, but he did. I won, but we get our bet is that the loser gets to choose what they give to the other one as a winning. So he sent me a vintage Vote Reagan T-shirt, which was good. It was fun. It was fun. So he figures he figured if I wore it, he won. But I think we have other things to talk about, and we have to remember that this isn't the sole thing that defines us when we're talking about our families and our friends. It may cause a rift with friends and family that is irreparable, but when I'm talking to him, I know that we have other things that we've talked about, that we've built up this history of things over the past 49 years where we talk about areas of common interest. And we have a whole group of friends in between who think all over the place. And he used to be much more liberal than I am, so it's been interesting to see his development.
Brooks Sutter is wondering if you know people in the room who have opposite, strongly held beliefs. Does it make sense to agree to listening ground rules at the start?
I think signaling people out.
Well, even as a family.
I think as a family, I think that's the idea. If the family, or if you're a guest at the family, if basically the rules of the table is we don't talk politics at the table, we save that for the football field, or what sort of setting ground rules about we don't talk politics, we don't talk religion, we don't talk. I forget what the other things that you're never supposed to talk about at the dinner table that my family always does. But if those are the ground rules, those should be the ground rules. I'm not sure you should change them this year. I think that really sort of creates even more of that tension that you brought into the room. I think whatever rules you had from year to year, if you're going to the same place you went to Thanksgiving every year, or if you alternate it, if the rules were always that you had vivid and lively discussions at the table, I would have those discussions. And the idea basically would be is the ground rule should be you're civil, and that the cutlery stays, used for cutting the meat and the vegetables, not for throwing.
The non-human.
Yeah, right. that basically people are civil, and that there's no name calling. These are things that shouldn't have to be said.
Right.
I think the broad notion that we either do or don't talk politics at the dinner table is an okay rule, ground rule to set. But for someone to decide, probably the host to decide, okay, we're going to talk about politics, but here's how we're going to talk about it, that kind of creates, it's up to the person, totally up to the guest. So I'm never going to get invited to that person's house. But I think that creates it elevates the tension in the room by saying, we know there's tension, so we're going to limit how people are going to do this. I think you're either in or you're out.
Kelly McSweeney is wondering about families who are passionate, that actually tend to agree on politics.
Right. It's boring.
Right? Well, any suggestions for elevating the conversation beyond the echo chamber?
Well, I think one of the
things.
This is Kelly, right? One of the things that I think is interesting is that there are people who are passionate about it, and if you're on one particular side or another, and Kelly doesn't indicate which side her family is on.
No, she doesn't.
Kelly. So there are issues on both sides. So if the family is like-minded and there's a new administration coming in, that means there are both actions and activities to be had on both sides. So if you feel like there may be things that happen that you think should not happen or are detrimental to the country or that are against what you believe in, that's a time for the family to talk passionately about, all right, what are any of us going to do? Are we going to get active? Are we going to get active by what was it people did? There was a record number of donations to Planned Parenthood in Mike Pence's name this week or last week. Are we going to do that? Are we going to flood Paul Ryan's phone calls when he has an open call to people? Are we going to fill out Donald Trump's GOP survey of what he should do in the first 100 days that he has online that people can fill out and stop just short of giving a donation? If we're on the other side, if we're on the conservative side and we're all in agreement, what do we want to see in the first 100 days? What are we going to do to try to help make sure that whatever the reason was, but we voted for this guy, we help make that happen? What are we going to do? So I think sort of talking about, if you're passionate, talking about how are we going to stay involved, what are we going to do, that becomes a perfect opportunity to do that. I would imagine that on the passion is often more elevated on the side of the group whose candidate lost. But that's still a great time to be able to do that because they may come up with things that you hadn't thought of or that you're involved with that they're not. So I think that's a great opportunity to do that. So the passion should be encouraged and nothing is ever over. That's the beauty of life. Well, life is over, but that's more of a mortality issue than it is.
But then it doesn't concern you anymore.
Right, that's right. There will be people to fight on.
This is a bit off topic, but Michaela Connery was wondering, the fact that we're having this conversation at all shows how deeply this has impacted a lot of people. Right. Should we expect this tension to continue going forward?
I think when Barack Obama was elected, I think we saw a lot of protests in the street or on fields from the Tea Party. That's when the Tea Party sort of elevated and came out into the streets. I think there was tension then, not for the people who won that election, but for the other side. And there was some tension there about what now. I think it probably feels more intense now because of the unknown. I would like to think that the tension can sort of, once there's a clear idea of what's happening, that it could sort of transform into an energy that if you want to affect change, to channel it into that. So whatever you're involved with, whatever cause you're involved with, that tension and that energy that's devoted to that, if you could channel that into that could be a great solace to the people who are feeling this tension now, because you can see that there are still things that you can fight for, whether it's on the local level or on the state level or on the national level. So I think that the tension will tend to get redirected. I would hope that it would get redirected to something positive.
And when it comes, we've spoken mostly about family here.
Right.
Thanksgiving obviously is coming up. But going beyond that, you mentioned your relationship with a very close friend. What about with friends in general? Friends, and even extending to the office. Of course, you're the author of The Simple Art of Business Etiquette. How should people be approaching?
Well, I mean, one of the rules
places?
of the rules of thumb in the office is slightly different than other friends. But one of the rules of thumb in the office is that your personal beliefs and your disagreements you should work as hard as you can not to let them get in the way of doing a good job. If you work for a place where you don't share the values of the people who work there, you're working in the wrong place. So that's just a decision that people need to make. But you shouldn't try to, in the same way you shouldn't convert people from one religion to another in the workplace. You know that, right? You also shouldn't try to do that. You shouldn't use that for electioneering and politicking and trying to convert them to whatever side you believe in. That's not the appropriate place for it. You and I both tend to work at a place where that is the appropriate place for it, because we talk, in some regards, we talk about issues, we talk about politics, and it's the Kennedy School. Mm-hmm. So we talk about those things. But even then, we have to be tolerant of those who don't agree with us. Not everybody, even though it's perceived to be a bubble, not everybody at Harvard and not everybody at the Kennedy School was a Hillary supporter. Right. And we have to acknowledge that and be accepting of that shouldn't interfere with us doing our work and doing a good job. I did have an interesting thing happen. I really love working with my students at the Kennedy School, and my class met on the Thursday morning after the election. Wednesday was kind of a blur for them because it went so late into the day, and they had a big deadline on Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, and it was a big deadline. And most of them, I know because they're great students, have been working on it all along and really have prepped all along and done it. And I'm sure no one had put it off to the last minute, so that Wednesday when they were dealing with all that other stuff but I knew that they came in and they had a big deadline too, and they knew that if they didn't get in on time, I would still read it and give them comments back, but they wouldn't get credit for it. Mm-hmm. And no one asked me for an extension, and everyone met the deadline. One of them met it within like four minutes, but she prides herself on always doing that anyway. So I think, and then one of them had said to me, in some classes, professors had offered extensions, and I just responded by saying, good. And also reminding them that none of them asked, which was amazing. I mean, many of them were struggling both on the national level and on some local levels, and felt it really strongly, and people were tired, but they did amazing work. Mm-hmm. And that was that's the way you'd expect any student to be, or any person at work to be. Is we can feel about this other stuff one way, but that doesn't mean we're not going to try to do the best work we can do, because part of the work they're trying to do here is to address some of the issues that they think need to be addressed, that are being affected by this election. So that was an amazing opportunity for me to see where they could have fallen apart, and they may have fallen apart, but they still did good work, which was great. Mm-hmm. That's only one of the reasons I love my students. So they're also smarter than I am.
That helps.
Yeah.
Jeff Seglin, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us today. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and I apologize for the abrupt start, or at least it was abrupt to us.
Well, I'm sure they'll tell us if we said anything off color or wrong.
I'm sure. Jeff Seglin is a lecturer here at the Kennedy School. He's the head of the communications program, and of course the author of we get to actually plug the book in person. The Simple Art of Business Etiquette.
Great Christmas gift, Hanukkah gift. What other holidays? I don't want to offend anybody.
Yes, well,
graduation gift.
However you want to give it to me.